Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose. Affirmative.
Okay, girls, ladies, and gentlemen, welcome back to the greatest show on earth and a story that's never told, because the powers that be say, no, we know better than you guys. We can't tell you the truth. What did Jack Nicholson say in that movie? You can't handle the truth. Well, Greg Anthony here, and I assure you, you can handle the truth on the Investigative Journal, because we tackle it every day. You can catch me at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. Get shows going back well over 15 years regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Yes, you've heard of that, haven't you? And many of you say, what the hell does the Vatican have to do with it? Well, that's why you should listen to this show. Well, anyway, for those of you who have been long-time listeners, today I was sitting here, I got so much on my mind. Many things are floating through my mind about what I wanted to talk about. And I just can't really settle on one of them. I really can't. So I'm going around and around and around trying to figure out what should I talk about today. I've got many things. We can talk about, what? The satellite hoax? Do you really believe there's satellites in the sky? Or should we talk about the new 5G internet that goes through ground-based towers emitting, microwave radiation that could be at extreme high levels that could really affect your health? Well, should we talk about that? Or should we talk about the Jesuits in China? That's always interesting to me, how they went there in the 1600s, and I've always wondered their connection to China, and that's an interesting story in itself. I do know this, that they did start rebuilding a Catholic church in the year 2000 in China, so that's another thing we could talk about. Or should we talk about all the Mother Teresa scams and all the billions of dollars that never get to the poor? Or should we talk about the Fatima, Mother Mary apparition scams by the Vatican and Medjugorje? And all of these different stories are just rolling around in my head. But one thing I was thinking about today was, man, you can't trust anybody on the internet. You don't know who you're talking to. And I've had so many of these instances where I think one person is really on the level, and then I find out all these things about them. And for the last 10 to 15 years, it's happened to me numerous occasions, because anytime you deal in this kind of information, you're going to run into what they call trolls that are trying to hide the truth, and then people actually working for the other side, and I say the other side, I mean the Vatican-led New World Order, posing as if they're truth seekers. And so you run into so many different problems. So what I thought today I would do was go back to the best of Greg. Yep, back years and years. We're going to go back well over a decade and talk about the cult buster. We're going to talk about a guy by the name of Philip Kronzer that I can no longer talk to. That's why I want to do this show, because the last I heard, Phil's getting up there in age, but man, this guy was put through the ringer for getting to the bottom of the Medjugorje Mother Mary apparition scams that the Vatican and the Jesuits have played on people and collected millions of dollars. And the government never seems to be interested in doing anything to stop that. Do you realize how much money people waste? And they believe in these fake apparitions, and the Vatican gets away with it. Now, everybody knows that people can donate to the religion of their choice, but I would rather give it to where you know it's going. if you know it's going to help somebody, okay, but if you give it to Mother Teresa, many of the women that work for her, sister said, it never comes back to the poor, or a very small portion does. So I thought what we'd do today, for the remainder of the hour or so, is go back to the show with Phil Kronzer. Now, this was broadcast on the Republic Broadcasting Network when I worked there. And I thought it'd be good to go back because these scams are still going on. Yes, they are. And so I thought I'd center on that. And while I replay the best of Greg, I will make sure I get out all the commercials because RBN had a lot of commercials. And I'll do that the best I can. And then I will see you tomorrow, live on the Investigative Journal.
Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski, here from 2 to 4. And what a guest I have today. They call him the Cult Buster. That's Phil Kronzer. And you're going to want to listen to this interview coming up after I give a brief introduction here of several issues I have to clean off of my desk. And then we'll get to Philip Kronzer, and we'll get to an interview about religious fraud, about a number of other things involving the Vatican and other religious organizations that have been infiltrated. And we were going to talk about this with Philip Kronzer, so you stay tuned for this interview. And remember, if you want to get a copy of it, I'm even telling you now, you're going to want to, if you miss it, go to our archives section. That's rbnlive.com. Go to archives and get a copy of your favorite hosts' shows all the way back to when the station first began. So make sure you take advantage of that. Let me say, we've had a focus on the show a lot of 9/11, the war in Iraq, the illegal war in Iraq. I got away from that on my website the last week or so. And you can go to arcticbeacon.com to catch a lot of my print articles. But what I've been focusing on is that phony war on drugs. And I had two guests, Celly Castillo, a former DEA agent, and Ramona Lopez, a mother working in Camarillo, California. And from the top to the bottom, you see how our government, through these two interviews, Celly telling us how he had firsthand information during Iran-Contra that our government was legally in the drug trade, billions and billions of dollars of drugs being sold by people like George H. Bush, Negroponte, we can go on, Oliver North. And Celly, for years, has been trying to get justice and still is trying and talking about that, but the illegal drug trade goes on. Then I interviewed Ramona Lopez from Camarillo, California, and she was a mother who just wanted to help children, and she's been targeted by our government because she stumbled across information that showed that even down to the local authorities, through covert ops, they want to make sure there's a market for the drugs, so they keep these kids on drugs. They don't try to stop it. And Ramona has been the brunt of unbelievable harassment. Go to my website or go to RBN Live archives to get those two shows, that phony war on drugs, just like the phony war in Iraq. If you know something, go back a week, and I covered the story about illegal experimentation on our children. Maybe over 50,000 kids that have been illegally experimented upon with CIA money. And this crosses all borders into psychiatric institutes in Canada and America. And I'll tell you something, if we don't clean these things up, we don't have a prayer. Because, we talk about the truth will set us free, and we talk about we want to make this place a better place for our children. Well, we better get those criminals in Congress to work on these stories, and if they don't, they should be gone. Plain and simple, just like they should be gone if they don't deal with the 9/11 investigation properly and the illegal war in Iraq properly, which could extend out to Iran and Syria if we don't do something as American people. And that's what we're talking about on this show last week. And when I get back, we're going to delve deep inside the cults that have been destroying our religions and our governments, and Phil Kronzer's been on the front lines of this for a long time. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Okay, back on the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski, and today we're going to talk to Philip Kronzer. Once he gets back on the line, his phone dropped out, so we'll give Phil a nice introduction here until we get him back on the line. Mr. Producer, let me know. Phil was just there, but anyway, Phil Kronzer started this foundation called the Philip Kronzer Foundation for religious research back in 2001. And in his words, he did it for this reason. Each year, thousands of people endure mental and physical sufferings due to the deceptive, deceitful, and mind-numbing effects of religious fraud. Unfortunately, myself, and this is Phil talking, and my family recently fell victim to a group who took advantage of us. When he finally realized we had been manipulated, when Phil did, his business was destroyed, as well as his 39-year marriage to his lovely wife, Artie. And with that, Phil Kronzer started a foundation that is doing some good things. And Phil, how are you today? Are you back?
About that?
Are you there, Phil?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you dropped off the line there for a minute. I gave you an introduction, but let's tell us how this Phillip Kronzer Foundation for Religious Research began and why you did that.
Well, I formed a foundation in early 2001. I was in a long, multi-year battle with a cult, which evolves around the apparition site, the alleged apparition site of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Medjugorje, which is a small village in Bosnia-Herzegovina, not too far from Mostar. My wife, Artie for short, A-R-D-I-E, we were married for 39 years when she disappeared on June 30th of 1994. Artie and I had been involved with these apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary since 1987 in Bosnia, and then, of course, it evolved into getting involved with some other people who were also so-called visionaries, but everything seemed to spin off of Medjugorje. I didn't know it at the time, but Medjugorje is a total fraud. It was from the beginning and still is today. It's literally a $1 billion ripoff. My wife had been involved with...
Now, you're a devout Catholic, correct?
Yes, I was born and raised Roman Catholic in Wisconsin. My family on both sides was Roman Catholic. And
We're in Wisconsin, by the way.
I was born in Two Rivers.
Wow, do you ever hear of a place called Burlington?
Yes.
My dad had a dairy farm there.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in a place called Burlington, Wisconsin for a number of years. Beautiful place. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, I went to school in Manitowoc and then went to high school in Sheboygan and moved to California in 1952.
Okay.
So we had been involved in prayer groups in Medjugorje, and different visionaries and people came and stayed at our house in California. I have a house in Los Gatos, or I had a house in Los Gatos, which I lost after my wife. They got her to divorce me. I had a 5,000 square foot house in Los Gatos, had a house in Carmel near the beach, and my family has been absolutely demolished and devastated by this whole situation. And
how did you get led out to Bosnia? Tell us that. How did this begin?
Well, we'd already been to Europe many times before. In 1987, we went to Lourdes 5 times. We're in Fatima a few times, and some of the other more politically approved shrines. So we'd been to Europe 18, 20 times prior to 1987. I was a businessman, and we ran a company in Campbell, California. We were very successful, and we could travel a lot. So we got involved in Medjugorje in 87 when we first heard about it, and it was totally believable. Here you have this village in the middle of nowhere, just nothing but rocky hill country, and we heard about it, and it was quite fascinating. And for at that time, it was still pretty much under the communist rule. And but we read up on it and got talking to some other people who had been there, so we decided to go.
Tell our listeners what was going on in Medjugorje.
In 1981, it was actually, in fact, June 25th, the Feast of John the Baptist, St. John the Baptist, 25th. There were 6 children in Medjugorje that allegedly had an apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Actually, on the first day, I think there were 2 girls and 1 boy, and then eventually the second day there were 4 girls and 2 boys. That's where it started. They were quite young at the time. The youngest visionary, his name was Yakov. He was about 9 or 10 years old. The pastor of St. James Church there at the time was a Father Jozo Zavko, and the assistant pastor was a priest by the name of Tomislav Vlasic. That's where it started, and the way it goes, the story goes that Jozo Zavko was out of town at the time, and when he came back about 3 days later, all this thing had been transpiring, and a word got out, and within a week they had big crowds of people showing up. There's tape recordings of what happened on the first week of what really took place, and the children were asked, well, what did Our Lady say? Well, she was talking to us about certain things. They said, well, did she say how long she would be here? And as it ended up, after about 3 or 4 days, the answer was, well, she said she would be here just as long as we want her to be. Well, we've got information of what really happened at the beginning. In fact, there's a book written by E. Michael Jones, who's from South Bend, Indiana. And E. Michael Jones had Fidelity magazine. Now he calls it Culture Wars. Jones had ended up writing a book called The Medjugorje Deception, and he and I worked together in 1997 time frame when he was writing that book. What happened is there was a charismatic meeting that took place in Rome just 6 weeks prior to that June date of 1981. And there was a large charismatic gathering. There was a priest there by the name of Father Emil Tardif, who I believe he's deceased now. But he had some kind of a vision, and he said that he saw this Thomas Vlasic, that Our Lady was going to come and protect you and defend you. I see there was some real bad blood at that time between the Franciscan province of Mostar, which was where Medjugorje was, and the secular, the diocesan priest of Bishop Zanic at the time. The Franciscans were supposed to turn over parishes to the bishop in Mostar, and they refused to do it. It's a lot of politics and a lot of the Croatian nationalism, and this feeling that they have. So there's always been a battle raging there.
Well, you mentioned at the top of the hour you were taken in on this supposed fraud, and your wife was also.
Right.
She disappeared. Tell us about that. How did that happen? Then we'll get back into the story.
Okay, well, it actually took some time. From 1987 until 1994, we were involved with Medjugorje and other prayer groups and other apparitions besides. We also went around 1992 to Spain to Garin Vendol, which was another alleged apparition site. Well, what the bottom line is, my wife got into it deeper and deeper, and I more or less sat on the sidelines, and I became a little bit suspect. But actually, where she got in trouble, she got involved with a visionary, a fake visionary from Denver called Teresa Lopez. And Teresa Lopez came on the scene around 1992. And see, what happened is the war broke out in Bosnia around Medjugorje in 1991, the Civil War, and then people weren't going there because it was too dangerous. So these same people who were promoting these apparitions decided that they would move Medjugorje temporarily to Denver, Colorado, which is set up Teresa Lopez, and she was up on the mountain by the Mother Cabrini Shrine, and she was drawing crowds of 10,000 on a weekend. So it was just a continuation to keep this whole thing going. My wife got in head over heels with this group, and she also got involved with a woman, her name is Marcia Smith, and the two of them were involved in all of this. And of course, I was being more or less the odd man out, and I wasn't being told everything that was going on. And in 1993, in November, my wife Artie was invited to a retreat in the mountains near Denver, that place called Snow Mountain Ranch. That's where she met up with a group of people that were under the leadership of a Bishop Pavel Nilica. And Nilica was from...
He was a Jesuit.
A Jesuit, right.
You know something, Phil? I just want to interject here for our listeners, because where this story goes, this started out as a personal issue that basically destroyed your life, correct, Phil?
Right, exactly. Right.
And what it's done from here is grown, because you've served, your research has served for many people that I've talked to. One, Jonathan Leaving, attorney who sued the Vatican. And these tentacles of these cults go, they stretch out a long way all over this world. And you've been really uncovering some unbelievable things. So get back to Nilica, because this guy's come up a couple times in the Vatican bank scandal, billions of dollars being laundered and never found. And he serves as a person involved in that. So go ahead. That name is interesting.
Well, let's focus on him then for the time being, because he first, based on documents in my possession, he was pretty much introduced into the Denver area of 1990, late 91, early 92. He had a secretary working for him by the name of Luciano Alamande. Luciano was from Rome, and he was his secretary. At the time, at the beginning in 91, he was not an ordained priest. And when I was
not ordained, Luciano. Well,
first of all, getting back to Nilisa, there was a lot of mystery as to where he really came from and how he became a bishop. He was out of Czech. He was born in Czechoslovakia, as far as we know, and then he was ordained a priest. I don't know the exact year, but shortly after being ordained a priest, within literally months, he was consecrated a bishop. And there was a lot of controversy, and there's several different stories, versions of how he was actually consecrated.
Okay, Phil, we're going to take a break right now. Get back with you in 3 minutes. You're listening to the...
Okay, I'm going to break in here. We're back in 2019. Okay, yes, we are. I'm going to get back in the next half hour and get as much of that interview in as I can today. Greg Anthony here on the Investigative Journal. And isn't it amazing when you look back, going back to 2000, when were we here? 2005 or 6? And nothing's really changed. You can talk about the war in Iraq, 9/11, and I was really curious what I said then. It's going to extend to Syria and Iran? Wow. Maybe it did, or has. Hasn't it? It's crazy. But, these people, they work in, if you really follow, they are very systematic, and they do things over and over again. That's why they have to rewrite history, because they have done these things hundreds of years ago in different forms, in different ways, in different cultures, but we're subjected to it today. And this particular story interests me because I grew up as a Catholic, and I believed in the Mother Mary. And all of those statues and all of her apparitions, I remember thinking when I was a kid about Fatima. And isn't it interesting, they use little children. Mother Mary always comes to these little kids. But look what happened to the 3 kids in Fatima. That's an incredible story that we looked into years ago. And it's amazing. So you don't want to be a little kid in their Mother Mary apparition fakes, because you're going to end up with the short end of the stick. So you don't want to be one of those little kids, because it's amazing. They use anything. They have no scruples whatsoever. Remember the story I did yesterday regarding the satanic worshiping in the Vatican and all these child sacrifices that go on? And how about these blood dinners they have, where they believe that if they inject themselves with children's blood, they're going to live longer? My goodness. You don't want to get near these people. They're strange, aren't they? Very strange. But we deal with them here because, you know what? Most people don't know anything about it. We're going to come back more with Phil Kronzer in the next half hour on the Investigative Journal. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures? and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, and I want to get back to Phil Kronzer. It's a really important story. Before I do, let me mention this. You can go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com, and if you want more shows like this, you can get many of them there. And also, I want to update you on an issue regarding my old website that you'll hear on this old broadcast, Arctic Beacon. Basically, it's been hijacked, and if you go to it, you'll find nothing incriminating or anything. You'll just find no way to get in touch with anybody, and just a few articles that they put up. That's it. It's just to block anybody from reading about the Vatican or any of these stories. But you can still get them here. You can get a lot on First Amendment Radio and go to my archives there. So they can't stop you. No, we will pursue this to the end. And I remember saying this in the beginning when I first learned of this story in the 1980s. Until we can get this story on the mainstream and people will look at it with the same view that they look other stories in history, then I'm not going to stop. And I will say that many more people understand it now. And the real problem is, though, these people on the internet that pose as truth tellers and then really screw you over in the end. So let's get back to my good buddy, Phil Kronzer. And I will do this in the next week or so. I'll update you on where he is. If he is still, I haven't talked to Phil in a while. And we'll update you on everything from the time I last saw him and talked to him. And let's get back to it right now.
Here on the Investigative Journal, my guest is Phil Kronzer. He started a group called the Kronzer Foundation for Religious Research. He's nicknamed the Cult Buster. His work includes trying to uncover just what has happened in the Catholic faith as well as in other religions, and what has happened in our government, what has happened in other governments. Has someone, really ask the question, has some organization, some group infiltrated these groups to bring about a New World Order, to bring about war across the country? Phil, am I off base? I've interviewed so many people that have been telling me that. I've been trying to get to the bottom of it. What do you think?
The bottom of, the situation in the church today, in the Catholic Church?
The situation in all, possibly all religions have been
Absolutely.
infiltrated.
Yes, it's an attack on Christianity.
And
there's definitely connection to a world order.
And why don't we'll get back to that major question after we get into the particulars. I want to finish up. You were talking about Bishop Nilika, his relationship to this to Medjugorje, and also perhaps a more involved relationship in the Vatican. And don't forget to finish up the story about your personal story of you and your wife. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay, well, Bishop Nilika, then, let's get back to that. He was connected with a group called Pro Fatribus at one time. That goes back into the 1960s. And by the time I got to know who he was, they changed the name of the group to Pro Deo et Fratribus, and Luciano Alamande, who I mentioned earlier, was his secretary. I didn't find out about all of this until a year or so after my wife disappeared, and I started digging in and doing an investigation over in Denver. Neelitz, again, was consecrated a bishop very early after he was ordained a priest, and he had a lot of connections with the Vatican. In fact, he was a very close friend of John Paul II, and that's true, he was. And Luciano, in 1991, was on the West Coast traveling in California, and he was trying to find a seer or a visionary that he could form a spiritual union with. That was the word we got. And he met up with a woman called Christine Muggeridge from Santa Rosa, California. Eventually, he went with Christine Muggeridge to Denver, and that's where they found this woman called Teresa Lopez. And Lopez became the seer in Denver, and she was part of Neelitz's group. She literally became the private seer for the Pro Deo et Fratribus movement under Neelitz and his guidance. They formed a group called CEM, Catholic Evangelization Mission for Russia, right in Denver. And there was a fellow by the name of Dick Herbsha who wrote the business plan, and I've got a copy of the business plan. They were going to raise $200 million. Now, the interesting thing is, the Luciano Alamande, in 1992, I have a letter in my possession where he got an entree into the National Conference of Catholic Bishops in Washington, D.C. He wrote a letter to a fellow in Denver named Scott White, and I have that letter. And he said that Bishop Korich, K-O-R-E-C, got him an introduction for a meeting with the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, and in fact, just before he left Rome, he had a meeting with John Paul II's secretary discussing this whole arrangement. So they ended up coming to Denver, setting up CEM, Catholic Evangelization for Russia, with a $200 million business plan. It was all fraud. Teresa Lopez, we found out, had been married 5 times. She had abandoned a couple of children. Her last husband was Jeff Lopez. She was a heavy drinker, and she was on drugs. And when Luciano first came to Denver, he was not a priest. They tried to get into the conference in Notre Dame. What had happened at Notre Dame University, they had been holding charismatic conferences there every year, usually around May, since the early 80s. And then by 1989, the numbers began to dwindle. That's when they brought in the Medjugorje crowd and became a combination charismatic and Medjugorje conference in 1989. And in fact, there was a priest from Medjugorje by the name of Father Phillip J, who was the English-speaking priest who they wanted to come and speak there, but he refused to do it because he was becoming very suspicious already at that time what was going on. Neelitz tried to get in there in 1992, and they were denied. They would not give him access. So Neelitz took Luciano Alamande and 4 other fellows to Fatima, and he had them ordained on December 8th of 1992, right in the shrine of Dekova in Fatima in the wee hours of the morning. He had a bishop that he brought in from, I believe, Czechoslovakia. I don't remember the name of the bishop right offhand, but he did the ordination. Now, the word we had is none of these guys ever went to a seminary. So, and Teresa Lopez, the so-called seer, was there at the ordination. Well, there were some things going on between Luciano and Teresa Lopez that weren't quite right. And we knew that because we had witnesses to it. So this was a total scam.
Well, listen, Phil, let me take another break. We'll continue on with your story in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal. Okay, we're back. And before I get back to my guest, Phil Kronzer, let me give a plug for tomorrow's show. I got an email today, and it was kind of eerie, but anyway, it has to do with tomorrow's show. And this emailer named Paul says, Greg, I've been listening to your archives recently. Well, I think it's good you talk about these things and are educating a lot of people, I think. If you haven't already, you should listen to the complete Mystery Babylon series of broadcasts by William Cooper. For those of you who don't know who William Cooper is, he was a long-time activist who years ago was talking about the same things we're talking about today, about the New World Order, about its tentacles being all over the world, governments, religious groups being infiltrated. Well, anyway, Mr. Cooper was killed in a strange incident, and we're going to talk about that. But anyway, the emailer goes on to say it's 41 hours long. That's Mystery Babylon, and very comprehensive. It's available on torrent and legally through his site, Hour of the Time. They killed him, so be careful. Well, anyway, last week I had scheduled an interview tomorrow with Doyle Shamley. Those of you who don't know who Doyle is, he now broadcasts Hour of the Time in William Cooper's name, was a best friend of William Cooper, and was right beside him for all the years that they gathered research. Doyle's going to be with us tomorrow, give us the straight story from his side about how William Cooper was killed, and don't miss that interview tomorrow on the Public Broadcasting Network from 2 to 4 on the Investigative Journal. Phil, let's get back to your story. You were talking about how this group, the Medjugorje people, moved to Denver, how Milica and all these people infiltrated this, using this as a fraud. Just before we get back to the particular, what's the point of them doing this from your research? Go ahead.
Well, it's always money, number one. Money and power. We have a woman by the name of Anna Marie Schmidt. She's quite elderly, but she came from, I'm not sure exactly where she came from in Europe, but I believe Germany or somewhere in there. But see, she knew Nilitsa from before, and through a very good friend of mine, a very good nun, Sister Philip Marie Burley, Anna Marie Schmidt identified Nilitsa as a KGB operative from years ago. Mm-hmm. And again, it was all money. They had a $200 million business plan set up in Denver, and they had this big visionary, Teresa Lopez, who was all set up, and they would ended up going to the Mother Cabrini Shrine, which is up near Golden, Colorado, and there's a retreat center up there, and they were drawing crowds as many as 10,000 people on a weekend. So they were rolling in the money.
Rolling in the money.
Exactly. And Teresa Lopez ended up, she came to San Francisco, South San Francisco, I believe it was about June of 1993, and my wife and I were still together, and everything was fine. And we went to that conference, and I was there when Lopez was up speaking, and without a script for an hour, she went on and on, and I even believed her. I mean, I literally, she was more mesmerizing. Mm-hmm. And we even had a video of it that we brought home, and wanted to show it to our children. I've got 3 grown children. All of our children are in their 40s. Now they don't talk to me because I've been declared insane. That's how they do it to you. Okay. Anyway, we got into that in June, and then my wife went on this retreat that I was talking about. This was in November of 1993, and she went with this woman, Marcia Smith, and I wasn't invited. And they were at Snow Mountain Ranch in the hills, the mountains above Denver. And she came back, and I didn't know her. I mean, her eyes looked funny, and she was acting very strange, and she started picking fights. Then they had another retreat in California in January of 1994, and Nilitsa came out with another one of his phony priests, a guy by the name of Paul Sigel, and they had this weekend retreat, and I got the video of that, and I mean, it was nothing but mind control. People, they were literally chanting the rosaries. You could see what was going on. And then in May of 94, they took my wife Artie to Notre Dame for another a conference and a special retreat, and I wasn't invited. She was gone for about 6 days. And we have a video of that where Artie is on stage with this Marcia Smith woman, and they're giving testimony on behalf of Bishop Pavel Nilitsa, and Nilitsa was supposed to be, they were introducing him as the spiritual leader of the entire Medjugorje movement all across the United States.
And this was at the Notre Dame conference?
Notre Dame conference.
You finally got into that then?
They finally got in. Once they got these guys ordained, they got some credibility, and they worked their way in. Then there was a Sister Emmanuel Millard, who was also in Medjugorje. She had was involved with a group of nuns called the Beatitudes. Now, that's an order that Bishop Bratko Peric and most are banned from Medjugorje, but he can't get them to leave because they just don't listen to what he says. I met Bishop Peric back in 1998. He was a very good man. So here we had this Lopez thing, and we had the video of my wife up on stage, Marcia Smith, who wrote the script, and my wife, you could see that she was under total mind control. There's no question about it. And at the end of that, they raise their rosaries and say, to the triumph, okay? And then they kneel down, and Bishop Nielitsa prays over them. So I showed that video to my children about a year after the fact, and they went ballistic, but eventually they got my children to turn against me, and they believe their mother. It's what they can do with mind control on this stuff, Greg, is absolutely unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Now, what eventually happened to your wife?
Well, I say she literally disappeared on June 30th. I came back from Carmel. I was in a golf outing with my son-in-law, my son, and a customer. And I came back, and I came home to empty closets, and we couldn't find her for 3 months.
And but when you did find her, what happened?
Well, what happened is this Marcia Smith woman had literally leased a condominium for her, set everything up under her own maiden name, and set us everything up, and she had her tucked away and hidden. We had zero contact with her for the first 3 months, and my daughter Cindy and my son Mike were going crazy over the whole situation. I mean, they thought I was going to commit suicide. I mean, I was devastated. 39-year marriage, and it's just thing out of the blue, she's gone. And we all knew that she was acting kind of strange for several months before that, but we just couldn't put our finger on it.
Right.
But she was under total mind control.
So then she leaves. The children and you are lying together.
Right, two of them, and my son Doug was estranged at the time from his brother and sister anyway, so he was kind of odd man out. But Cindy and Mike, we got into this thing together to figure out. They finally, at the end of September, found her up at Marcia Smith's house, went up to see her, and tried to get her to leave. And after about 20 minutes, Marcia Smith just literally put her into her vehicle, her Jeep, and drove off. She wasn't about to leave. She couldn't focus her eyes. She had lost about 15 pounds. And believe me, she didn't have 15 pounds to lose. So we were beside ourselves. So eventually, she did come out and meet with my children. But prior to that, she hired a female divorce attorney from Palo Alto, California, by the name of Cheryl Cassidy. We find out now that Cheryl Cassidy is a card-carrying member of Call to Action, and she wants to be ordained a priest. They call her Ms. Catholic. Mm-hmm. They also call her the liquidator. She's got a reputation for breaking up assets and disposing of everything. To see what they're doing, there's no question what's going on out here in this Silicon Valley atmosphere. They're literally breaking up marriages, and the real estate brokers and the divorce attorneys are laughing all the way to the bank. It's a racket.
I see. So they're breaking up your marriage, and they get your assets, correct?
Exactly. I lost $5 million just on 2 houses because they were sold by court order. And in September of 1994, Artie's attorney told my accountant, because I didn't even hire an attorney at the time, he told my accountant, well, besides the money that Mr. Kronzer is paying her every month, which we paid her immediately, there was no argument about it.
Well, there's no way to repair this marriage then?
Well, there wasn't even a talk of counseling or reconciliation of any kind. We didn't even have access to her.
And you see, to me, let's say you're looking now, you're trying to mount a defense. I mean, they're going to just say, hey, this is a scorned man. His wife had problems, and look at what's he talking about.
I have a 30-year restraining order against me right now. Now, very early on, within the first 6 months, my 2 children, Cindy and Mike, I got in touch with Cult Awareness in Chicago at the time. They were still in business before Scientology put them out of business. And I got in touch with them, and they were very helpful. They connected me with people who gave me information about what was going on. I flew to Philadelphia with documents of what I had. I had very little at the time. And I went to Philadelphia and had a meeting with a guy by the name of Dave Clark in a hotel. We spent about 3 hours together. I told him what I had, and he said, there's no question, your wife's under my control. She's in a cult. Dave Clark is one of the best exit counselors that ever came along. He's taken them out of the Moonies and everywhere.
Yeah, now, where's your wife as we speak today?
She lives in Foster City with the same woman, Marcia Smith.
And you said now earlier you made mention that they you're considered crazy, and
yep.
Your other children now have turned against you. How's that?
Well, it took a little time. What happened is, let me back up a little.
Okay.
In September of '94, Artie's attorney said, by the way, we'd like $100,000 in cash. And I told my accountant, I said, well, tell them so would I, because I was still running businesses and we had lines of credit, and I wasn't about to borrow money to give them the $100,000 cash. So what happened is they took Artie to Rome and to the Holy Land with Bishop Nilica and about 20 people, and she was supposed to pay for the whole bill. And I found out from a priest later on in Denver that, yes, Bishop Nilica had asked her for $80,000, and that's what the $100,000 was for. Well, when I said no, that's when they took off the gloves, and that's when the fireworks started. Then about a year later, in May of '95, my two children, Cindy and Mike, were getting fed up with the cat and mouse game that was being played. They couldn't see their mother. So 2 weeks from Tuesday, I can see for lunch at 2 in the afternoon, that type of arrangements. And then she always had her cell phone with her, because they were watching her like a hawk, figuring that, and the fact, the truth is, we did have people working with us in Cult Awareness Network. We were going to do a family intervention. We had one shot at it where we rented a couple of cabins up in the mountains near Lake Tahoe by Truckee, and she was agreed to go. We had it all set up. The kids convinced her to go, and I had the two deprogrammers coming out from Baltimore, and we were praying for a blizzard, and by golly, at the last minute, she came up with laryngitis, and we had a leak. Somebody found out about it. That's why we couldn't get her to come. We had her out at that time.
Right. Now, what kind of mind control programs have they used on her that you're aware of?
Well, we have information that they're using electronic devices in Medjugorje and holograms, okay? Trying to pin this down and prove it is very difficult, but we've gotten enough information from different sources that they do use this electronic mind control thing, and the Russians developed this stuff a long time ago. And it has been used. And holograms to make people think that they're seeing visions. You see, Father Malachi Martin, you've heard the name?
Oh, of course.
Okay, well, see, I never met Father Malachi Martin, but we gave him a video that was called Visions on Demand, which was the first video that these people in England made, and I got involved with them later. And E. Michael Jones was on that video about Medjugorje. And we sent it to Father Malachi Martin, and he sent us a postcard back saying, thank you and congratulations for exposing the hoax of Medjugorje. I declared it satanic from the beginning. And he gave us permission to use that quote. And we did. And boy, when we did, we were threatened with lawsuits from several different sources. So there's something about Medjugorje that's much bigger than I don't even know about yet. It's just, there's something huge there.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, there's a ton of money involved. Franciscans were involved in their own bank. But back to this Lopez thing, in May of '94 at Notre Dame, Bishop Nilica celebrated Mass with Tomislav Pervan, who was at the time the provincial of the Franciscans of the Mostar province, which controlled Medjugorje. Now, these people will deny that they had a relationship, but Nilica was in and out of Medjugorje regularly since we know for sure around 1984, before my wife and I even went there. And of course, you remember the murder of Roberto Calvi.
Of course.
Okay, yeah. Calvi was hung under the bridge in '82, Blackfriars Bridge.
Yeah. Now.
Okay, I wanted to stop it right there. I want to come back maybe tomorrow and finish this up. It's a 2-hour interview I did, but I did many, many hours with Phil. Many hours. And the bottom line is that they set up Medjugorje as a fake Mother Mary apparition, and then they were targeting rich, especially Phil, a rich businessman, and programming his wife against him. And what a story he turned out to be. And it just showed you how these apparitions, the Fatima apparition, etc., are just geared to fool everybody about their real intentions. We'll get back to it tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.